When I heard my mother-in-law's voice whisper through the phone, I felt my stomach drop like I'd stepped off a cliff I didn't even know existed. That's how it started. Our honeymoon, supposed to be the happiest week of our lives, and instead, I was frozen in shock, listening to a voice I shouldn't have been hearing at all. It was soft, deliberate, almost casual, but the words she said pierced straight through me. I remember that night clearly. The hotel room was dimly lit, the soft hum of the air conditioner filling the quiet spaces between us. Fresh flowers from the lobby sat on the nightstand, their scent faint but sweet, mixing with the lingering smell of the ocean breeze drifting in through the balcony door. I had just slipped out of my dress, wrapped myself in the hotel robe, and was sinking into the plush sheets when Michael, my husband, leaned over with his phone in hand. "Before we sleep," he said, a nervous but firm edge in his voice, "I want us to call my mom. It's tradition. She likes to hear from me every night." I hesitated, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. His mother, Evelyn, had always been intense. Not unpleasant, but controlling, demanding in a way that made you tiptoe around her. I had met her once or twice before the wedding, smiled at her jokes, nodded at her advice, and kept my distance. But Michael insisted. "Please," he said, eyes soft and earnest. "It's important to her, and it makes me feel connected." I nodded, masking the unease curling in my chest. The phone call should have been brief, a polite goodnight, a few scripted exchanges, but something in Michael's tone was different this time. There was a shyness, almost embarrassment, as if he was performing a ritual he didn't fully enjoy. I watched him dial, watched him wait for her to pick up, the screen glowing softly in the dark. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice almost timid. We just wanted to call and say goodnight." A pause, and then her voice, Evelyn's voice, filled the speaker. It was smooth, confident, like silk stretched over steel. "Good night, baby," she cooed. "Did you have a good day?" Michael chuckled lightly, trying to sound casual. "Yes, Mom. It's beautiful here. The hotel is perfect. The food." His words trailed off, and I felt the air tighten around me. "Good," she said, and then something shifted. Her tone dipped, just a fraction, almost playful but with a sharp edge I couldn't place. "Did you touch her yet? Or are you still my good boy?" I froze. The words hung in the air like a toxic fog, and for a moment, I thought I had misheard. My pulse raced, my chest tightened, and I glanced at Michael. He was still smiling, oblivious, talking to her like nothing had happened. But the knot in my stomach wouldn't let me ignore it. It didn't make sense. Not the words, not the casual way she had said them, not the image of my husband so comfortable in their conversation. I wanted to believe it was some terrible misunderstanding, a twisted joke, something I could laugh off later. But the unease settled in my bones. We ended the call after a few more mundane exchanges, Michael promising to call her tomorrow, his hand brushing mine as if to reassure me. I lay there staring at the ceiling, the hum of the air conditioner suddenly loud in my ears, my mind replaying every word. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Evelyn's voice had sounded so casual. Maybe I misheard. Maybe my nerves were frayed after the whirlwind of wedding planning and travel. But then, without realizing it, I remembered the little icon on the phone. The record notification. The hotel app had auto-recorded our call for clarity, for convenience. And in that instant, my heart sank. The very conversation I had just been straining to dismiss could have been captured, saved, replayed. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound in the room startled me. The soft swish of the curtains, the creak of the floor, Michael's breathing beside me. I kept my eyes on the phone, wondering if I dared to press play, to hear her words again, to confirm what I already feared. The next morning, we wandered through the hotel gardens, the sun warm on our shoulders, the scent of hibiscus heavy in the air. Michael laughed, holding my hand as if nothing had happened. And for a fleeting moment, I wanted to believe in the normalcy, in the love we had promised each other. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted, and it would grow. Quiet, persistent, impossible to ignore. Because from that moment on, nothing felt the same. Every smile Michael gave me was laced with uncertainty. Every gesture, every touch, haunted by a shadow I couldn't name. And the thought that his mother, the woman who had raised him, who had influenced him in ways I had never known, could think of me like that. It was unbearable. I had no idea how far this would go, or how much it would unravel the life we were just beginning. But I knew in that quiet, sunlit hotel room, with the ocean breeze brushing past, that our honeymoon would not be about love and new beginnings. It would be about discovery, betrayal, and the impossible weight of secrets. After that night, I tried, truly tried, to put it behind me. Michael didn't seem to notice anything amiss, and I didn't want to start our marriage off with suspicion or resentment. So I focused on the small, ordinary joys of being newlyweds. Unpacking our suitcases in the hotel room, laughing over who had packed more unnecessary shoes, stealing chocolate from the minibar, and holding hands as we walked along the soft, white sand. Before all of this, our life had been simple, predictable in a way that felt comforting. Michael worked in finance, his days long but structured. I ran a small interior design studio, which allowed me both creativity and independence. We'd met at a friend's gallery opening 2 years ago, and the slow burn of dating, full of dinners, weekend hikes, and quiet conversations over coffee, had made me think I knew him completely. I had imagined our wedding and honeymoon as the natural, joyous next step, but Evelyn's voice had already cast a shadow. Back at the hotel, I noticed small things about Michael that I hadn't before. The way he answered his phone with a bit too much secrecy. The way his laughter sometimes felt rehearsed, like he was performing for someone I couldn't see. And at night, when he thought I was asleep, I caught him staring at the ceiling as if listening for something I couldn't hear. I tried to focus on the beauty around us instead. The sound of the waves curling against the shore, the way the morning sun caught on the hotel's glass panels, the smell of salt and flowers mixing in the warm air. It felt like a fragile illusion, a temporary refuge from a sense I couldn't name. On our second day, we had breakfast in the hotel's small dining room. The aroma of fresh coffee and buttery croissants filled the air. Michael poured orange juice into our glasses, his hand brushing mine just lightly enough to make me feel reassured. I wanted to trust him, desperately, so I pushed away the thought of his mother, of that whispered question, and focused on the conversation we had with the hotel staff, the couple sitting next to us, the tiny details that made a place feel like a memory in the making. But the world outside our little honeymoon bubble kept nudging me back to reality. I caught glimpses of Evelyn's influence, even in casual remarks from Michael. "Mom would love this view," he said once, gesturing to the ocean. Another time, he hesitated over a menu item, saying, "Mom always told me to avoid anything too messy." Small things, almost laughable, but together they painted a picture I didn't want to see. That evening, we returned to our room, the soft hum of the air conditioner mingling with the distant cries of seagulls. Michael leaned against the balcony railing, the orange-pink sky reflecting in his eyes. "This is perfect," he said quietly. "Just you and me." I smiled, clinging to the words like a lifeline. But inside, I felt a quiet tremor. Because even as he said it, I couldn't forget the voice that had infiltrated our night, the suggestion of control, the undercurrent of something wrong. It was the way he would casually mention his mother in everyday conversation that made my skin crawl. "Mom says I should always be polite to hotel staff," he said one morning, adjusting his tie. Or, "Mom will expect a full report when I call her tonight." I wanted to laugh it off, make it seem trivial, but the weight of that single sentence from the first night, the one that shouldn't have existed, hovered in every syllable. Even in the intimacy of our honeymoon, I felt watched. Not just by Michael, but by the invisible presence of his mother. The way he spoke to her, the way he listened so intently, it was as if a third person existed in our bed, in our conversations, in our plans. I remember standing on the balcony one evening, the wind tangling my hair, looking out at the endless ocean, and wondering if I had been naive. I thought I knew the man I had married, but marriage was a deeper ocean than dating, and I was only just realizing its depth. I had entered these waters believing it would be calm, but there were currents I couldn't see, strong and silent, pulling me towards something I wasn't ready to face. And then the first small clue arrived. It was a message from Michael while I had gone to shower. A picture, innocuous at first glance, of our breakfast tray neatly arranged in the dining room. The caption, "Mom would approve. Good boy." I froze under the spray of warm water, the words echoing in the tiles like a warning. Approval. Good boy. Not a joke. Not a harmless tease. It was validation, confirmation, that he was seeking someone else's judgment for our private lives. My hands trembled as I wrapped myself in the towel, trying to steady my breath, trying to convince myself that I had misunderstood again. But deep down I knew. This wasn't just control. This was obsession. This was interference. And somehow, I had stumbled into it blindfolded, believing love would shield me from it. That night, as we called Evelyn before bed, I stayed silent. I didn't want to hear her voice again, didn't want to risk the words I already feared. Michael spoke softly, oblivious to my tension, and I watched him like someone else entirely. The warm hotel room, the soft linens, the scent of flowers, they couldn't mask the cold truth settling into my heart. I had married a man whose life, whose desire to please, was still tangled in the grip of his mother. And I didn't yet know how far that grip could reach. The next few days of our honeymoon felt like walking on a tightrope over water I couldn't see. I kept trying to pretend everything was normal. Michael laughed, held my hand, and kissed me goodnight. But beneath that warmth, I felt a quiet, gnawing unease that I couldn't shake. Every glance he gave me, every casual mention of his mother, made me feel smaller, as if I were a guest in a life that wasn't fully mine. It started with small things. The phone always on his side of the bed, calls that he said were work emergencies, but came from unfamiliar numbers, texts that he would quickly swipe away when I entered the room. I told myself not to read into it, not to imagine things that weren't there. But the mind has a way of noticing details the heart tries to ignore. One afternoon, we were walking along the shore, the sand warm under our feet, the waves curling at our ankles. Michael stopped suddenly and pulled out his phone, his expression unusually tense. "Just a sec," he said, stepping a few paces away. I pretended not to notice as he typed quickly, fingers moving almost too fast. But I caught a glimpse of the screen, his mother's name flashing at the top, a string of emojis I didn't recognize, and a message that read, "Did you do it yet?" I froze in place. The words burned into my vision, as if the sun itself had seared them into my mind. I wanted to turn away, to pretend I hadn't seen them, but the image lingered. My stomach knotted, my hands damp with sweat. That night, I lay awake while Michael slept, the hotel room dark except for the moonlight spilling through the curtains. I could hear the gentle rhythm of his breathing, feel the steady rise and fall of his chest, and yet I couldn't shake the thought that his loyalty, his affection, even, wasn't entirely his own. Somewhere, intertwined with it, was Evelyn, his mother, her influence, her expectations. I tried to distract myself, counting the floor tiles, listening to the ocean, thinking of the life we would build together once we returned home. But the memory of that first night, the words she had spoken, soft and casual, like an everyday question, haunted me. "Did you touch her yet? Or are you still my good boy?" The next day, I noticed him hesitating before he touched me. Just a moment's pause, a hand hovering over mine, as if seeking permission not from me, but from somewhere else. The intimacy that should have been ours felt mediated, filtered, as if someone else's presence had crept into our bedroom. I tried to push it aside, telling myself I was imagining things. I wanted to trust him. I wanted to believe in the man I had married. But every instinct in me screamed that something was wrong. Then came the turning point. We were sitting on the balcony in the evening, the sky painted in shades of pink and orange. Michael's phone buzzed again, and without thinking, I reached for it. My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment, and then I did something I knew I shouldn't. I opened the messages. It was worse than I had imagined. Texts from Evelyn, some innocent sounding but loaded with implication, others blunt, direct, demanding. "Don't forget what we talked about. Remember who's watching. Are you behaving? She needs guidance." And then chillingly, "Did you touch her yet, or are you still my good boy?" I sank back into the chair, the wind whipping my hair around my face, my chest tight, my heart racing. Michael had no idea I had seen it. He was across the balcony, laughing softly at something I couldn't hear. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, and I felt as though those shadows had taken root inside me. That night, I tried to sleep, but my mind was a storm. I wondered if this had been going on before our wedding, if it had shaped the man I married in ways I hadn't recognized. Every touch, every whispered word, now felt tainted by an invisible third presence. I felt trapped in a reality where my husband's mother had more control than I ever anticipated. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't confront him. Not yet. Not without proof. And yet the proof existed. The phone had auto-recorded that first night. The evidence was there, waiting for me to face it, to decide if I wanted to confirm the nightmare that my instincts were already screaming at me. The days of our honeymoon passed in a blur after that. I smiled, laughed, and even kissed Michael, but every moment was shadowed by suspicion. The hotel's soft linens, the scent of salt and flowers, the warm sun on my skin. All of it felt like a stage set for something I wasn't meant to see. By the end of the week, I realized that our honeymoon hadn't been about romance or love. It had been a slow reveal, a quiet unveiling of the power dynamics I had never anticipated. I felt betrayed, not by a stranger, but by the very people I had chosen to trust. And I knew deep down that when we returned home, I would have to make choices. Choices about trust, about love, about the boundaries of family. Choices that I hadn't expected to face on a honeymoon. Because some secrets, once glimpsed, cannot be unseen. Some betrayals, once sensed, demand action. And for the first time in my life, I realized that love wasn't enough to protect me from the influence of another. The moment of discovery didn't come with a grand reveal. It came quietly, like a trapdoor opening beneath my feet, in a way I could not ignore. We had returned home from our honeymoon, suitcases unpacked, wedding photos framed, and life attempting to resume its normal rhythm. I thought naively that maybe the vacation's tension would fade, that Michael would finally be just mine. But reality doesn't always comply with hope. It started with the phone. Michael left it charging by the bed while he showered. I don't know what possessed me, but I picked it up. There it was, the recording icon blinking faintly in the corner. My hands trembled as I tapped it. The recording from our first night began. Michael's voice soft, polite, even nervous. "Hi, Mom. Yes, we just got here. It's nice. Thanks, good night." And then Evelyn's voice. Soft, confident, smooth, casually predatory. "Did you touch her yet? Or are you still my good boy?" I heard it again, clearer this time. My heart pounded so loudly I thought Michael would hear it in the next room. I pressed play several more times, unable to stop, each repetition cutting deeper into me. Every syllable, every inflection, confirmed the reality I had feared. I didn't need to listen to more. The damage was done. I waited, frozen, until Michael stepped out of the bathroom. He was towel drying his hair, humming a song I didn't recognize. I could feel the weight of the recording in my hand, but I didn't confront him yet. I needed to understand, needed to see if this was isolated or something worse. The next day, I followed his patterns quietly, observing his phone calls, the subtle nervousness when his mother's name appeared. It wasn't just the honeymoon. It had been ongoing, shaping his decisions, his behavior, even the way he looked at me. Then came the moment I couldn't ignore. We were sitting in the living room, unpacking our wedding gifts. Michael's phone rang, and he answered quickly, lowering his voice as he moved into the kitchen. I pretended to focus on the boxes, but I could hear snippets of their conversation through the thin wall. "Yes, Mom, everything's fine. No, not yet. I was waiting for." I know. I'll do it soon." I felt the color drain from my face. My hands shook as I set down the delicate china. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but my voice caught in my throat. How had I married a man whose first loyalty, whose deepest, most private obedience, was to his mother in such an intimate, twisted way? I waited until the call ended. Michael returned, smiling, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. "Sorry about that," he said lightly. "Mom just wanted a quick update." "Update on what?" I asked quietly, my voice low but firm. He froze. For a second, I saw confusion flash across his face. Then, a flicker of irritation. "Just, honeymoon stuff. Mom worries." I shook my head, my chest tight. "Michael, I heard you." His smile faltered. "Heard me? Heard what?" I placed the phone on the table between us, the screen displaying the recording. "This. I heard this night one. And today I heard the calls. Tell me, Michael, what is happening here? Because I can't believe this is normal." He sank into the couch, rubbing his face, silent. The room was filled with tension so thick I could feel it pressing against my ribs. Finally, he spoke, voice low, almost defeated. It's complicated. She's always been involved." I didn't. "You didn't mean?" I whispered. "Michael, your mother asked if you'd touched me yet. This isn't normal. This isn't a motherly concern, this is..." I struggled to find words. "This is invasion. This is manipulation. This is wrong." He looked up at me, eyes glistening with guilt. I didn't know how to stop it. I thought I could keep her happy and still be yours. I didn't know how to make it work. "Make it work," I repeated, my voice rising slightly, trembling with anger and disbelief. Do you even understand what this is? You're married to me, Michael. You're supposed to be building a life with me, not living under her control. Not letting her. She asked about everything. Everything. The room went silent again, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of cars passing outside. I could feel the betrayal coiling in my chest, sharp and bitter. I wanted to hit something, scream at him, shake him until he saw what he had done. But mostly, I felt a deep, aching sorrow. I realized in that moment that the man I had married, the man I loved, was not fully free. He was entangled in a web of his mother's making, and I was caught in the strands. I stood up, the recording still playing softly on the phone, and walked to the window, trying to breathe, trying to process the enormity of the discovery. The city lights twinkled outside, oblivious to the quiet devastation inside our home. When I turned back, Michael was watching me, waiting, and I knew that nothing would ever feel the same. Our honeymoon, our wedding, our marriage. Everything had been infiltrated by a presence I hadn't anticipated. And now I had to decide, how would I respond? Would I confront this head-on, or quietly gather my strength, prepare for what was coming next? Because some betrayals demand more than silence. Some require action. And I was done pretending that everything was normal. I spent that night alone in our bedroom, the phone recording on the nightstand like a ticking bomb. Michael had fallen asleep hours ago, unaware that my mind was spinning, plotting, questioning every ounce of our marriage. I traced the pattern of his behavior, his obedience to his mother, and the lies, small ones at first, little omissions that now formed a mosaic of control and deception. I knew I couldn't confront him yet, not without a plan. If I did, he would retreat, deflect, and Evelyn would tighten her grip even further. I needed evidence, clarity, and a way to reclaim the life I had married into. The first step was documenting everything. I started with the phone. I saved the recordings, the texts, the screenshots of messages. Each one felt like a nail in the coffin of my naive trust, and yet, I had to see it all laid bare. The more I listened, the clearer the picture became. Michael's loyalty had always been divided, and his mother's obsession was not a whisper. It was a constant, suffocating presence. I began small experiments, testing boundaries without him realizing it. I casually suggested we skip the nightly calls for a day. Maybe we just relax tonight, I said, smiling lightly. Michael froze. His hand hovered over the phone. Mom, she'll be worried, he said nervously. I'm sure she'll understand. It's just one night, I replied, keeping my tone calm, almost affectionate. But the panic in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't choosing me. He was choosing her fear, her approval. And that confirmed what I already suspected. I had married a man whose life wasn't entirely his own. I realized I had to take control, not in anger, not in revenge, but strategically. I couldn't just leave. I had to reclaim my marriage, my dignity, and my space. The next step was confrontation, but indirect. I called one of my oldest friends, someone who had always been a voice of reason in my life, and walked her through everything, calmly, factually. I didn't cry, didn't scream. I laid out the recordings, the texts, the implications. She listened, then said quietly, "You need to show him the consequences of this. Not just to him, but to her. If you confront this gently, with clarity, he'll have to choose." Her words were a lifeline. I began planning carefully. I would record my own observations, my own voice, documenting the moments that proved the intrusion. I started a diary, short entries at first, detailing Michael's reactions, his hesitation, the way his eyes would dart toward his phone even during our most intimate moments. Every note, every detail, was a step toward reclaiming control. The final piece of the plan emerged one morning. Michael had gone out to run errands, leaving his phone behind. I played the recordings again, listened carefully, and then, almost instinctively, began writing a letter to him. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I wrote clearly, calmly, detailing what I had discovered, what I had felt, and the boundaries that had been crossed. I ended the letter with a simple, piercing question. Michael, who do you truly belong to, me or her? When he returned, I placed the letter on the kitchen counter, alongside the recordings. I didn't speak. I didn't watch him pick it up. I let the evidence speak. He saw it immediately. His eyes went wide, his mouth opening, closing, words failing him. For the first time, I saw him truly confronted with the reality of his choices. I can explain, he stammered, but I shook my head. No, Michael. You don't get to explain. You get to choose. You've spent our honeymoon hiding, lying, and allowing her influence to control every moment of our lives. Now you see clearly, and now you must act. Because I won't live like this. I gave him space, but I didn't back down. I stayed calm, my voice steady, my heart pounding. I let the room fill with silence, letting the weight of the betrayal settle fully on him. It was hours before he spoke again, and when he did, it was with tears, apologies, and an exhaustion I had never seen before. He admitted everything, the obsession, the control, the guilt. But more importantly, he finally began to recognize the consequences of his choices. That night, I made him promise to take a break from his mother, to set boundaries, and to allow our marriage to exist independently. I didn't know if he would keep the promise. But for the first time since the honeymoon, I felt a flicker of hope. I had taken action. I had confronted the betrayal not with chaos, but with clarity, and that gave me a sense of power I hadn't felt in weeks. Because sometimes the most potent reaction isn't anger or revenge. It's steady, deliberate action, built on evidence, calm observation, and unshakable boundaries. And as I lay down that night, watching him finally sleep without the weight of someone else's voice in the room, I felt the first real breath of relief in days. The road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time, I knew I wasn't powerless. The confrontation at home was only the beginning. Once Michael realized how deep the betrayal had gone, the ripple effects began to spread. Family gatherings, phone calls, even casual conversations became arenas where the truth quietly, but undeniably, made itself known. It started with small things. A sister-in-law noticed the tension when we visited Michael's family a week later. I had kept my composure, smiled politely, and greeted everyone warmly, but Michael's discomfort was obvious. He didn't meet my eyes the way he used to, kept glancing toward his mother, and I realized the subtle confession was already happening without a single word. Evelyn, of course, was furious. I wasn't present when she found out, but the aftermath was impossible to ignore. Phone calls that had once been warm or perfunctory became sharp and clipped. Messages full of concern now contained thinly veiled accusations. "Why are you undermining your son? And you are destroying what we built." The tone had shifted from protective to confrontational, and I realized the public stage had already been set. At first, I considered retreating, smoothing over the rift, pretending it had been a misunderstanding. But the fear of being erased, of being made to feel small, pushed me forward. I refused to let her manipulate me into silence. So I took the evidence public carefully, without malice, but with clarity. I shared my recordings and documented observations with close family members who had always been honest, fair, and capable of understanding the situation. I didn't broadcast it to the entire world. I didn't need to. I only needed to make sure that those whose opinions mattered, who would hold both Michael and his mother accountable, could see the truth for themselves. The reaction was immediate. His siblings, some previously ambivalent about Evelyn's control, were stunned. They hadn't realized the extent to which she had exerted influence over Michael, even after he was married. Their questions were cautious at first, then more pointed. Did she really say that? How could he let that happen? I answered as calmly as I could, without embellishment, letting the recordings and messages do the talking. Michael's mother, for her part, tried to spin it as miscommunication, overreaching concern, even affection. But the weight of evidence against her was undeniable. Once the family had seen the messages, the tone shifted. They didn't need to attack her. They didn't need to defend me either. They only needed to acknowledge the truth. In the end, the social consequences fell directly where they belonged. Evelyn faced a combination of disappointment and disapproval from her own family. Friends began to distance themselves subtly, conversations filled with awkward pauses, knowing looks, and pointed advice. She was left with a choice: continue the behavior and risk complete isolation, or reflect and pull back. Michael, too, had to face judgment, not just from his mother, but from everyone who knew him. He had been complicit, aware of the intrusion, and his credibility suffered. But unlike his mother, he had a chance to redeem himself, to make the active choice to restore trust, to rebuild his marriage honestly. Through all of this, I maintained my dignity. I didn't attack. I didn't vilify. I simply presented the facts, demonstrated the betrayal, and allowed the natural consequences to unfold. And what struck me most was how powerful calm, deliberate truth could be. No shouting, no public spectacle, just measured action and unflinching honesty. By the end of the month, the household dynamics began to shift. Evelyn's calls were no longer nightly demands, no longer invasive inquiries into our intimacy. Michael stopped apologizing reflexively to her for every decision he made. And though the tension never fully disappeared, a new equilibrium was slowly emerging. One where boundaries were respected and our marriage could finally breathe. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one evening, Michael beside me, the recordings and letters tucked away but never forgotten. We hadn't fully repaired the damage, but for the first time, we were partners in the truest sense. Working through betrayal, facing the consequences together, and beginning the long process of reclaiming our lives. It was a slow, deliberate transformation. Friends and family who had initially doubted me, or hesitated, started seeing Michael differently too. He was still flawed, still influenced by his upbringing, but he was learning accountability, learning that love isn't loyalty to someone else's control. It's respect, choice, and shared trust. The public consequence wasn't cruel or vindictive. It wasn't about shaming anyone for personal failings. It was about recognition, responsibility, and boundaries. Michael and his mother had to face the reality of their actions, while I, for the first time in weeks, felt the oppressive weight of manipulation lift from my shoulders. And in that lifting, I found a quiet sense of empowerment. Not power over anyone else, not revenge or retribution, but the deep, unshakable understanding that I could protect myself, assert my rights, and insist upon respect without losing my dignity. I realized that betrayal can't always be prevented, but its impact can be managed. Its damage can be addressed, and its lessons can be learned. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of peace, a knowledge that, even in the face of deception and intrusion, truth and courage can carve a path forward. The weeks that followed felt like stepping into sunlight after being trapped in a storm. The tension that had haunted our honeymoon and continued to shadow our first weeks of marriage began to loosen its grip. Michael and I talked, really talked, for the first time in months. Conversations that had once felt impossible, dominated by fear and secrecy, now unfolded with honesty, accountability, and raw emotion. He admitted the ways he had allowed his mother to influence our lives, the nights he hadn't set boundaries, the moments when he had silenced his own judgment in favor of hers. I listened, sometimes with tears, sometimes with quiet resolve. I didn't need to chastise him. I needed him to truly see the impact of his choices. And he did. Slowly, carefully, with every sentence he did. We started setting boundaries together. Michael called his mother less frequently, no longer allowing intimate details of our life to be filtered through her. He learned to recognize her manipulations without immediately succumbing. And I learned to trust him again. Not blindly, but cautiously, letting the evidence of his efforts rebuild my faith in him. We also spent time rediscovering each other in the ways a honeymoon should have been. Sharing meals without distraction, laughing over simple mistakes, taking long walks without phones, talking about dreams and fears that weren't tainted by someone else's expectations. It was a slow process, like untangling threads from a stubborn knot. But each day the knot loosened. One evening, months after the recording incident, we hosted a small dinner with a few close family members. I watched Michael interact with his mother differently. Polite but firm, respectful but independent. Evelyn was quiet, subdued in a way that reflected understanding, or perhaps the dawning realization that control could not be absolute. And in that room, surrounded by familiar faces, I finally felt a sense of normalcy. I also found strength within myself I hadn't known existed. I had survived manipulation, secrecy, and the emotional shock of betrayal. I had acted not out of anger or revenge, but with clarity and courage. And in doing so, I reclaimed my life, my marriage, and my dignity. There were moments of reflection, too, late nights when Michael was asleep, and I would sit by the window, listening to the quiet hum of the city. I thought about the power dynamics I had witnessed, the subtle ways families can influence marriages, and the importance of boundaries. I realized that healing isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about learning, growing, and choosing not to let others' control define your life. I also forgave in my own way. Not forgiveness for Evelyn's words or actions. Those were inexcusable. But forgiveness for Michael, who had been caught between love, loyalty, and fear. I forgave him for the hesitation, the blind obedience, because holding on to anger wouldn't help us rebuild. And forgiving allowed us both to move forward with clearer eyes and steadier hearts. We began planning a life that truly belonged to us. Trips without her interference. Decisions made as a couple, not a trio. Even the small, everyday things, what to eat, where to shop, how to decorate our home, became acts of independence, tiny rebellions that affirmed our agency. And slowly we laughed again. The deep, unguarded laughter of two people who have survived a storm together. Not the carefree laughter of ignorance, but laughter tempered by reality, by understanding, and by the quiet joy of reclaimed trust. Through it all, I learned something important. Life will test you in ways you cannot predict. Betrayal can be subtle, layered, and quiet, but it can also be confronted and managed. Boundaries are not selfish, they are essential. And love, real love, requires courage, honesty, and the willingness to face even the most uncomfortable truths. Now, when I look back on that honeymoon, the flowers, the ocean breeze, the dimly lit hotel room, I no longer feel only fear or betrayal. I see the beginning of a lesson, one that shaped our marriage in ways that a perfect, idyllic honeymoon never could. I see the moment I learned my own strength, the moment I realized I could act decisively, calmly, and with integrity. And I see a marriage that, while tested, emerged stronger. Michael and I are still learning, still rebuilding, but we do so as equals, as partners, and with boundaries firmly in place. The scars remain, but they are a reminder, not of weakness, but of resilience. Because sometimes the greatest healing comes not from forgetting what hurt you, but from taking control, setting limits, and choosing a path forward that honors your dignity. I've shared this story with you not just to tell of betrayal, but to reflect on what it teaches us about love, boundaries, and self-respect. Life sometimes places us in impossible situations, moments when the people we trust most allow others to cross lines we didn't even know existed. And in those moments, the only way forward is clarity, courage, and a willingness to stand for yourself. I want you to think about that for a moment. How often do we ignore subtle red flags because we want love to be easy, because we want to believe in someone fully? How often do we allow others' control to shape our happiness without even realizing it? I acted not out of anger, but with careful observation, deliberate action, and the quiet strength to demand respect. And in doing so, I reclaimed not just my marriage, but my dignity. Michael and I are still rebuilding, still learning how to navigate life together without interference. But we are stronger because we faced the truth and chose boundaries over comfort, honesty over fear. So I leave you with this question. If you discovered a truth that shook the foundation of your relationship, how would you respond? Would you run, stay silent, or would you find the courage to confront it, calmly, thoughtfully, and with integrity? Life will always test us, but our choices and the courage to act on them define the strength we carry forward. If this story resonated with you, I hope you'll subscribe and follow for more stories that explore the lessons life quietly teaches us about love, family, and finding your own strength.